The theme of this panel discussion is reporting from conflict zones. Now, the closer a reporter is able to get to a conflict zone, closer viewers, readers, or audiences are able to get to a conflict zone. But where does one draw a line? There are issues of personal safety, there are issues of cutting through propaganda, and there are issues of bringing out the truth to boost trust, which is also the theme of this conference. Those are the themes we're going to talk about. We've talked about the conflict zones. Many examples come to our mind from our immediate present, unfortunately. There is crisis in Afghanistan, Ukraine war, which continues to rage on. We've seen economic, political crisis, which has been unprecedented in Sri Lanka. And therefore, this panel becomes all the more important. We have an esteemed panel of guests who bring with them rich experience, insights, and expertise in all of these areas firsthand. And to lead the panel, to chair the panel, very honored to have with us Mr. A. Surya Prakash, Vice Chairman, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. Mr. A. Surya Prakash is truly veteran in the true sense of the word, 50 years of experience, ladies and gentlemen, in media, both in print as well as television. He's a scholar, democracy studies, a strong defender of India's democratic tradition through his works. He's also author of definitive text on the working of Indian Parliament called What Ails Indian Parliament, published by HarperCollins. The other books, particularly the one of interest to us, the book on the emergency of 1975 in India. He's also held many key positions in print and television organizations. He's been editor with Z News, country editor, Asia Times, executive editor, The Pioneer, and is also the columns which are widely read and very, very popular amongst the readers and followers of his work. A warm welcome to you, sir, to our panel. I'll quickly introduce the other panelists also before I have your thoughts on the theme. We have with us in the panel Mr. Prasad Kaushalya, Assistant Director of Foreign News at SLRC, Sri Lanka. Nearly 3 decades of experience leading coverage of war, natural disasters, and much of it in Sri Lanka. It's wonderful to have you with us, sir. We're also joined by Ms. Imogen Anderson, senior producer with BBC. Extensive coverage of the Afghanistan war, from there to the Ukraine crisis as well. The sheer scope and sheer width of coverage and the stories that she's covered and done are quite inspiring. Wonderful to have you with us, ma'am. Ms. Katherine, Whitehead, Ariana TV, Afghanistan. We know the kind of crisis that has unfolded in Afghanistan and it continues to sort of recover from it. It's very important to also hear about the voice of coverage from the ground, which becomes hugely important. Ground reporting, seeing the crisis unfold in front of ourselves. Wonderful to have you with us, ma'am, and welcome. And finally, Oliver Meyer, senior correspondent with ARD German TV. Has reported extensively on all these issues: Afghanistan crisis, Ukraine war, Sri Lanka crisis, and also natural disasters. The floods in Pakistan, which have caused unprecedented damage, have also been covered extensively. So as we begin this conversation, the panel discussion on reporting from conflict zones, I'd like to invite the chair, Sir A. Surya Prakash, your thoughts first on this theme. And if I may, while researching extensively on the panel, you must have been a young man, a young journalist when the emergency happened in 1975, and you put it in the form of a book. And that is also a form of conflict because we know unprecedented media muting also took place around that time. So if you could share your thoughts about the theme and your own personal experiences.
Yeah, thank you very much. And Mr. Mayank Agarwal, the CEO of Prasar Bharati, and Mr. Javed Motagi, the Secretary General ABU, and fellow panelists and delegates to this conference. Really, the theme, truth and trust in times of crisis. I think truth and trust are very central to media and media's work, and I don't think you can ever separate one from the other. and there's a strong correlation between truth and trust. Untruth cannot beget trust. This we have seen as media persons across the world, whether amongst individuals or between media organizations and consumers of media. I think truth is very central for consumers of media to trust what we are saying. Over the years in India, there has been a certain, more so in recent times, there are issues in regard to truth and as to what is truth. And so many media houses today actually are coming into this whole controversy because over the years there is a feeling that we were moving away from truth. And this has caused enormous damage to the credibility of certain media institutions. So the fight for truth goes on. This you see in many democracies. There are many truths. You see it in America today in terms of different news, that is print and television institutions. You see it in India. But I do believe that if we are to secure our future, it is very important that we get our history right. And spurious history tries to hide truth from subsequent generations, and it promotes a culture of untruth. And this weakens the soul of a nation. That is why this effort must be made to get closer to the truth in regard to media work, and certainly that is possible in a democratic environment. Then the other thing is that more than the mischief caused by the purveyors of untruth, for example, in India, there are many people who are troubled by the reluctance of the establishment and media in the past to face the truth. So that has been an issue in media, within media, and I think that is very important for us to come face to face with this reality. The other reason for this is that India is the most vibrant democracy in the world, and we are also the most diverse nation in the world. I don't think there can be any argument or dispute about that. And all of us in this country are wedded to both democracy and the preservation of that diversity. And that can happen only if the media as a whole, you see, is on the path of truth. The other reason why I say this is that in the context of social media, with the advent of social media, what has happened is that journalism has got extended to the citizenry. Every citizen has become a journalist, and there's a certain recklessness and irresponsibility that you see in social media, and that poses a very grave threat to social harmony, especially in nations like India, which are extremely diverse. I think we all need to ponder over this, and that is why today's central theme for this conference, truth and trust, is very, very important. The other thing is that there are internal security issues in various nations. And when some individual try to whip up sentiments which disturb the unity or territorial integrity of a nation, it causes enormous problems. This is where I think the mainstream media has a very important role to play, especially in the context of what damage social media can do and is doing in many parts of the world. In India, you see, we enjoy freedom of expression. At the same time, our constitution imposes what we call reasonable restrictions. So we have very strong laws in our Indian Penal Code and the Information Technology Act and so on in order to deal with such problems. And I think that is very important to sort of condition this freedom in regard to these what we call reasonable restrictions. So while we enjoy fundamental rights, we also need to remember that there are reasonable restrictions to protect the larger interests of society and the nation and to preserve social harmony. All citizens, including media, also need to remember that there are fundamental duties going alongside fundamental rights. And this is something which our Constitution tells us, and it is very, very important for us in media to realize that these duties are critical, especially in the context of a very diverse and democratic nation like India. And as I said earlier, we need, in India is actually, we need to preserve our diversity and our democratic traditions. And this can happen only when we are closer to truth in regard to our working in the media. With these opening remarks, I would request our panelists to please come and speak
Absolutely,
about
sir.
truth and trust in the area of conflicts.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you very much for those opening remarks. And the advantage of having such an amazing panel who've all worked on the ground as far as conflict zones are concerned is to straight away come to their experiences. Imogen Anderson from the BBC, I'll come to you first. You've covered the turmoil in Afghanistan for many years and you continue to do so. Mm-hmm. You've seen regime changes. Mm-hmm. Give us an insight into what does it mean for a journalist to negotiate with that sort of a situation and continue to report as objectively as one can.
Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. So the main challenges in reporting in conflict zones is obviously you have very real security issues, and it's getting access in that security environment and with whichever government is ruling at the time. So with regards to Afghanistan, it's been a very interesting change. Obviously before the Taliban took over, our access was very much on military embeds, and we were telling that side of the story. It was very difficult to tell the other side, how that conflict was affecting local Afghan people. What we find now is actually that access, we are able to travel into areas that it was more difficult to travel into previously. So we are getting to places and we're getting to talk to people that we couldn't do previously. And that's been very, very important in trying to tell the story of the 20 years of war or more and how people feel now. But there is a challenge with the Taliban in trying for us to continue to try and tell the stories that we want to tell. Right. And we are in conversation with them about how we do that. And you know, that it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. You know, there is a lot of speculation that as their desire to get international recognition continues to be delayed, whether they will actually be providing less and less access to international media. It's already very difficult for local media. I know we have Katherine here of Ariana TV who can talk more about that. We do feel we have a privilege and that we need to be able to tell that story, and we're very aware that we're giving access that others aren't being given. But one of the main points I would like to say is that it's very difficult and one of our main challenges is telling the stories of both sides and being impartial. And that's what we have to strive to do. And that's difficult in Afghanistan and both Ukraine.
Right. And ladies and gentlemen, as we move ahead with this conversation, panel discussion, just a gentle reminder, you all can participate in it. Your thoughts, your questions, if you have any for the panel, or any observations that you want to share, you just have to raise your hand and we'll make sure that a mic reaches you. Katherine, I want to come to you. You were in Kabul when that transition was taking place. The coalition decided to leave. any conversation about reporting from conflict zone cannot be devoid of the personal experiences of the reporter, issues of personal safety and concerns. What did it mean for you as a journalist to be there? And how did you process that development personally and then cover the story as well?
Yeah, I think that's a key question that you've asked here, because I think a lot of times media houses, executives are very keen on getting the story, and we tend to, and the staff, the actual staff who cover the story, who put their lives at risk, are often forgotten about. And I've worked for Afghan media for 7.5 years now, and I've led quite big news teams, newsrooms, and I find that one of the key problems in terms of conflict reporting, or the difference between large foreign organizations and local media organizations. Foreign journalists will come into a country and they're prepared. They get heat training, they secure, they have bodyguards, they have armored vehicles, etc. Your local journalists who live in the country, who've been born and bred in the country, whose families live in the country, they're the ones who are often at bigger risk than the foreign correspondents. And I think that's one, that it's a big gap in our industry. It's something that we're not looking at, we're not covering. And it's not only the physical safety of journalists in those environments, it's also the mental state, their mental health. It's not being addressed. And going back, I've worked in many conflict zones around the world, going back more than 30 years. And in every newsroom that I go into, it's key and it's critical for me to bond with my staff. And I've noticed that it's a common thread that there are the occasional tragedies that could have been prevented had the right skills, or had the journalists been empowered with the right skills in how to deal with conflict. And I think, but going back to my point, it's on a local level opposed to foreign organizations. Right. And I think it's something we all need to look at.
Right, and I think that point you made about the mental well-being of the journalists, I think a gathering like this could also be very vital to be able to share your stories of shock, grief, and coming to terms with it. Prasad, Kaushalya from SLRC Sri Lanka is with us. So you work with the state television in Sri Lanka. Past few months, almost a year, has been very difficult for the nation. When the state itself is in turmoil, then you as part of state television, how does it impact your coverage? How challenging does the task become for you to report the developments to the people in the country and the world outside?
Yes, first, thank you. I would like to thank on behalf of SLRC to ABU and Prasad Bharati for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to discuss these things with you. Yes, now Sri Lanka faced many crisis situations. First, we had 30 years of war. That's a different situation. Then we had natural disasters like tsunami. The total coastal belt of the country was destroyed during 2004. Then we had COVID pandemic. That's a different situation. But this, the period you mentioned, the last from the latter part of last year, the Sri Lanka was gradually falling into first it was falling into an economic abyss because we saw the economic indicators were going down. As a media institution, first, we also try to understand what's happening. We were seeking information from the government, and we were continuously, we had discussions with the economists, and we carried interviews to educate the people about the economic situation of the country, because the first indicator was the foreign reserves. Foreign reserves are going down. Then by December, we were not able to make payments using foreign currency. It was totally barred from last December. So we were not allowed to use American dollars or any other foreign currency. Then then the situation became further and further deteriorated. Then there was a fuel shortage, gas shortage. Then because of that, electricity cut off. So those are the situations. Now what happened was actually, first we have to do our job and inform and keep the awareness of our audience as the state national television. At the same time, we also had to live through that situation because we had to face all those difficulties.
Yes, I was just coming to that point that such grave shortage of resources that we all heard about in Sri Lanka, as journalists, as part of an institution which obviously would also depend on those resources, how did your work get hampered? And within those limited resources, what was it for you to sort of make ends meet as far as your work is concerned?
Yes, we had to make, first we realized that we are going to, face a very unimaginable situation. We also, initially we didn't realize, one of my colleague, Deputy Director, Ms. Yumtika is here, she had to prepare the network of correspondents because the provincial correspondents, they were doing fantastic job while reporting these things. And it was a bit easy and economical for us rather than using our own crews. Because when we use our own crew, we have to mobilize one of our vehicles, we have to mobilize 3-4 people. So first we drew our plans to face the situation and adopted a crisis plan. We reduced the staff level. That means we divided our staff into 2 or 3 groups. Then we call them one group 2 days, the other group next 2 days, like that. So that's how we manage from the staff level things. Then the fuel shortage was also there. The SLRC vehicles, they were also in the long lines of fuel queues. But we managed with our existing vehicles. We did all the coverages. And at the same time, at that time, number of other problems were there, like the electricity problem. So we had to we had to request fuel quota from the government to run the generators in our station because we need a lot of fuel to run the generators during the power cuts. So those are the challenges.
Right. Oliver, if I can come to you, how do you relate to the points that Prasad mentioned? For someone who's reporting, who's based in a country in conflict, to someone who's going to a country which is experiencing a conflict of such extreme nature, what were your observations and the sort of pressure on the resources that you had in hand to be able to tell the story as it was unfolding?
You mean in Sri Lanka?
In Sri Lanka in particular.
In Sri Lanka. Yeah, in Sri Lanka it was, as he mentioned pretty much, I mean, it's difficult really to plan your stories, right? Because as he said, there's no fuel. There's always the danger of protests happening. There's always the danger of violence happening. So you need to do quite some stuff to prepare yourself in advance, like for example, get a hotel that is close to the ground that you're covering, like in Sri Lanka, of course, that golf face promenade, right? So you want to be close to that ground to be able to move yourself by feet and not by car when there's no fuel. What we bought was also helmets and glasses to cover ourselves from the tear gas that was being fired by the police. So it's always like a constant, you have to sort of prioritize, right? Where do you go in? Where do you stay out? I mean, you know it best probably. Like I remember the situation with the mass protests on Saturday. What was it? Beginning of July, the 9th of July, right? So nobody knew exactly how many people were protesting. So how far do you get inside? Don't get stuck there, right? Stay together as a team always. And then nobody knew the developments of the next days, right? I remember the Wednesday at Vikramasinghe's reigning place, the government, no, what is it, the which house? Vikramasinghe's reigning house.
Yes, his personal residence.
Yeah, the residence, right, the personal residence. And like also tons of protesters, tear gas been fired. We were like right there when the tear gas got fired, we ran away, still got something in our eyes. So that's always something, right, you want to have the pictures, but you still want to be in safety, and you're also responsible for your own team, right? And that's the first priority. So it's always like a constant struggle there.
Absolutely, and come to think of it, the manner in which a journalist goes about his or her work in a conflict zone is a story in itself. It's sometimes something that we're not able to explore. Dr. Surya Prakash, sir, with 5 decades of experience in media, you've seen the evolution of technology, of the style of coverage from conflict zones. Your observations, sir, about that evolution. How have we done well? Where have we gone overboard, if we have, at times, especially for the young journalist who might be watching excerpts from this conversation? Your observation about the evolution of reporting from conflict zones?
If you go back to the 70s, and you are in a conflict zone, and there is great tension all around, and that was in India, for example, that was the newspaper age. We were still not into the television age. Finding a telex office to go and file your story, it's just amazing how, you know, you got to, and getting there, getting the clerk at the telex office, you got to do your copy on a typewriter. And in the 70s, for example, we had what was called a trunk call. We had to book a trunk call. So you dial the telephone exchange and say you want to book a trunk call to the desk. The guy at the desk doesn't know that you are sent out there. There is a lot of miscommunication within newspaper establishments or media establishments many a time. So, and the lines are bad, and there are all people looking around where you are hollering on the phone, saying, I'm so-and-so and I'm calling from so-and-so. He will first start chatting with you. How the hell have you landed up there and this, that? He say, because you just get 3 minutes to file your story. And she won't understand the names you're stating, this, that. It was a terrible situation. From that stage, if you look at the 1990s, where I have myself carried my laptop, plugged it in, dial thing to get onto the internet and to file a story. Now, of course, you have reporters straight, you know, from their mobile. They can link up to the newsroom and do their piece and so on and so forth. So there's a, technology has, made life much easier, but the threat of reporting from conflict areas remains constant. It has not changed. And what happens
So you've
is
lived
that
through a time of media clampdown of the emergency, and you witnessed it firsthand.
Yeah.
How big a challenge was that when the state by itself, as it were, becomes an adversary of the media, supposed to be partners?
Those of my friends here from outside India may not be clued into what happened at that time. That was the eclipse of democracy for 19 months, between June 1975 and March 1977. And at that time, after the emergency was imposed, one of the first decisions taken by that government was to appoint a chief censor in every state. I was working with the Indian Express in Bangalore, and the chief censor was the Inspector General of Police. And look at the horror. Every day, our vans would go taking our typed copies to the Inspector General of Police. He would have a battery of police inspectors and information department guys who will pencil out things and so on and send it back. So that is a terrible situation. I don't think anyone in any country should ever face a situation like that where you don't have the freedom to report on events that are happening around you.
Right, right. Again, to our audiences present here, in the course of this conversation that we're having, reporting from conflict zone, if you have thoughts that you want to share, questions that you want to put to our eminent panelists, just raise your hand and we'll make sure that a mic comes to you. We have someone who has a point to make. If you can have the mic reach the gentleman. If you could introduce yourself first, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Dev Karan Singh. I'm with DD News. So my question mainly pertains to journalists who are on ground in conflict zones. In conflict zones, there's a tendency to, for there to be a lot of confusion as the situation is evolving quite rapidly. So how does an individual who's present there in a journalistic role, how do they authenticate the information to the degree possible, given the paucity of time and the challenges ahead? Thank you.
This is a very vital question. Do you address it to any particular panelist?
I'd be happy for anybody to answer, please.
Sure, sure.
If I can probably add to that.
Sure.
See, the national pride versus the call of reporting. In this context, I would like to know from Mr. Prasad Kaushalya, you reporting from Sri Lanka, you are a national there, you are a local citizen. You also know the obvious reasons why the economic crisis happened, the doldrums in which the country was, the conflict of interest by those in power, which was, and who was responsible for that, plus the external forces, the countries around, which contributed to the crisis. Being a Sri Lankan citizen, the call of a journalist, did you find it more difficult to report, which would probably be different for those who are from the other countries doing the same?
Right, let's get some responses there. We'll get some responses and I'll come to you, sir. Katherine, if I can come to you with the first question about when you're reporting from a conflict zone, you have to sift through a lot of data, information, versions of facts. How do you then do that? Because there's also a pressure, there's a security threat. What is life and work like in that zone?
I think that there is also, one also needs to define the word conflict.
Yes.
Okay, because you can have battles between military units and fighters on a battlefield. You can also have the situation where there are explosions, where there's been a car bomb, grenades thrown. So it all depends on the actual situation at that moment. In the event of it being an explosion, something that is more, that's contained to a specific area in a city, for instance, usually the authorities are on hand. They cordon off the areas, so that is your lead point, is to speak to them. If you have the contact details for the ministries, you would also be directed through them or go directly through them. The same would apply to a battlefield. It's to speak to get the information from authorities and to go on that, even though it's not necessarily 100% correct, but then one is attributing it to an official source. Okay, so there is a lot of your own sort of judgment. You need to use your own sense of judgment in this and weigh up, what is official and what's unofficial. And we're all in the business of sticking to the facts. So authorities give us, data. One should really go with that.
Right. Oliver, do you want to add to that point about the challenge of really presenting a version which is as factual as it can be under all the pressures?
Yeah, and I also want to add, like, maybe also you're referring to social media sources, which you have a lot in these scenarios, right? And that's, I think, one of the most challenging issues you face in that sort of situation. I guess we can all agree on that, because you have tons of videos. You have videos that might be even a year or older, and so how do you know, did it happen today? Did it happen, where did it come from? What's a reliable source? We all know Twitter now, and there you have like users with an anonymous profile pic and a strange name. Can you trust these guys, right? So I just had a talk with my German colleague, actually, who's also here in the crowd, and they are actually fact-checking these videos, right? They have procedures to fact-check these videos, which really helps us a lot, of course, in that situation. And we also train our producers in the studio to be able to fact-check stuff. But of course, it's difficult, because I myself, I have 8 countries to cover, and each country has its own, like, kind of, each country is different, right? So you have to apply different scenarios, but this is a big challenge, and I wouldn't say it's always possible. And sometimes you have to say you can't verify it, you can't use certain things, right?
Right. Prasad, Kaushalya, if I can come to you, the question was directed at you. A particular challenge when you're part of the state media and the kind of conflict that Sri Lanka experienced earlier this year and still sort of is recovering from it. What kind of pressures have you experienced, and what does it take really to still remain objective when you have, in a way, interest on both the sides? You have to address the concerns of the public, but you're also part of state media. What was it for you like?
Yes, now it's like this. SLRC is totally owned by the government. So we are covered by a parliamentary act. So we had to be, on one hand, we have to be work with the government. Actually, there are some government directions, rulings coming to us, coming to our management. Then, on the other hand, we have to be highly responsible than the other media, because if we made a mistake, as we are covered by the Parliamentary Act, it's like a violation of Constitution. So it's a very big burden on us from those two ends. So, but when we think about the current situation, previously they were under different situations. The pressure from the government, or the impact from the ruling party or the government, differs from time to time. It depends on their policies. But when we consider this situation, when the people's movement, we call it Aragalaya, and one of my private media colleagues is also there, they were also covering that, they gave wide coverage. When this, the people's movement, Aragalaya, became powerful, we got some kind of free hand. There were no directions from the government, not to cover this, don't put that, don't interview this guy, no, nothing. So we set our own framework and went ahead with the thing. And from the protesters, we have to remember this is an anti-government protest, and we are a part of the government. It's a government media. So my private media institutions, my colleagues, they had little bit relief, because there is no big pressure from the public. But the public think we are from the government, so we had to win the trust of them. So, but according to our coverage in this situation, there was a very good reaction from the other party, I mean the people who maintain the protest. And our cameramen, our media men, they were allowed to go into the protest camp, and they gave interviews, and we telecast them, and we offered everything to Asia Vision on the Asia Vision platform. So we adjust according to the situation. Day by day, the situation was changed. It was very rapidly, very fast-moving situation. We had to make very quick decisions. So sometimes, the decisions are made by the field people, the correspondent who are working with the protest camp, and who are in the middle of the clashes when the people are roaming into the president's house. Only two of our one-man camera people were there. they were able to send visuals as soon as possible when the situation took place. So
Right.
those are the situations we faced during the, it was a, double-sided, handling a double-sided sword.
Right. Dr. Surya Prakash, having led Prasad Bharati as former chairman, your experience of being a part of the public broadcaster, the opportunities and challenges that come with it in the context of our conversation.
I will say that there is a need for clarity on this issue, that a public broadcaster in any democracy, it is an entity that works for the nation. In fact, as Chairman Prasad Bharati at different fora, this question has been put to me when I spoke of, say, the Jan Dhan Yojana. For those of you who are from outside India, Jan Dhan Yojana is a program to get every individual to open a bank account. And this was initiated by the Narendra Modi government. And I think something like 350 million bank accounts were opened. This is simply phenomenal. I don't think any other country in the world can ever attempt this, to get every individual to open a bank account. When I spoke about that in a public fora, somebody stood up and said in a university, but that is a government program. I said, sorry sir, that is not a government program, that is a national program. The whole sanitation program that's on in India, or Jan Dhan Yojana, or so many other programs. These are all national programs, and I think it's the responsibility of a public broadcaster to highlight these issues, to encourage, to educate people on these programs, and to get them to open those bank accounts or take advantage of those schemes.
Right.
That is the difference, I would say, between a government entity or a national entity.
Right. Imogen Anderson, I'd like to come to you. Ukraine war, as it continues to sort of rage on, is on all our minds. You've covered it closely. You've seen a lot of brutality firsthand that we perhaps only hear of. There are also versions and perspectives about the war. Whose war are we talking about? Is it who's fighting whom, really? How do you negotiate with these themes? And whose version are you really presenting then when you cover a conflict like that?
Absolutely. I mean, that is really, in a nutshell, that's the challenge when you're going into those sorts of environments. With Ukraine, it is increasingly hard to tell both sides of the story. We have teams in Moscow, but it is increasingly difficult for them to operate. And it's absolutely essential that we are telling the perspective from Russia. We are telling how people in Russia are affected, how they're really feeling about it. And it's about finding ways to do that. When we do still have a team operating in Moscow, more recently we've been able to talk to the huge numbers of people who fled over the border to escape being drafted. It's about transparency, and when we are covering Ukraine, making it clear in some respects we have teams who are embedded with the Ukrainian army. Access has been granted to us from Ukraine. Quite often Ukraine, the government will stop you going to, for example, the site of a missile attack because they don't want that to be shown. But then that's a real issue for us. How do we verify what's happened, that it has happened there? And it's about just being very straightforward in our reporting about that's what we're up against, and that we aren't presenting one absolute truth. There are two sides to it, and we just have to be constantly conscious of that, because it's a real trap to fall into with Ukraine in particular, that there is one side there. So I would say that's really the main thing. I mean, with regards to actually witnessing atrocities, that's been quite interesting actually. Obviously, we were there for 4 weeks, exactly at the point that Russia withdrew from the areas around Kyiv. So we spent every day going into those areas and seeing what was done. And some of that access was controlled by Ukraine, but some of it wasn't. And we were able, with the help of local journalists, social media tips, all sorts, to get to various areas where we found out that things had happened, and we got there often first, and we're talking to people and documenting that. I mean, nothing can beat being on the ground and being there in person and talking to people and cross-checking and just hearing those stories without anybody else, any authorities around monitoring what you're doing or your access. So that's the number one thing that we try and do with the balance of security risks, is just get there and just talk to people. And once we've got those stories, cross-check. You know, we don't always just go with hearsay or what we've been told. We do cross-check those stories. Does that tally? Does that make sense with what we understand of the facts?
Right, I think that's a vital insight. The thorough cross-checking becomes such an important aspect of reporting from conflict zones. We had some questions from the audience members. If you can return the mic to people who want to ask questions. Can we have the mic, please, for the audience members who want to...
Okay. This is Rajendra from Nepal. Good afternoon. I would like to know about Sri Lankan experience from Prasad Kaushalya. You are a neighbor of Nepal. So I would like to learn from you. Okay. Consequences is a news. And before the economic crisis, what was your Rupa Bahini's experience on alarming the issue of reducing forex reserve? So foreign currency reserve is reducing. What was your television's role at that time? Did you conduct debate, discussions and made news, or what was your experience and what can be learned from you to us? Can you share your experience before the crisis or when the foreign exchange reserve
I think that's a vital
started
point.
to reduce?
The circumstances that led to the crisis, how were they being covered while the crisis was in the making?
Exactly.
Please, yes.
Okay. Now it's like this. That was the first indicator of the economic crisis, the going down of the foreign reserves and the difficulty of making bank things. So those were the first indicators. So what we did actually, you know, there was a certain time that one central bank, the previous central bank governor, he was denying the situation. He didn't accept it. We carried his version. At the same time, we knew that there's a such situation. So as the national television, we then contacted the various economists. And we carried series of interviews in our news bulletin, and we had our talk shows. What kind of a situation will take place if the foreign reserves of the Sri Lanka going down, and went into a very disastrous situation? What could be the result? So now once the economists warned Sri Lankan people in those interviews. They warned that not to buy the things, not to spend their existing money on luxurious things. And they ask people to not to buy mobile phones and not to spend on mobile phones and clothes. Just keep them if you need, this money you may need in the future, like that. Because it's not actually what happened. There was such situation. Even economists did not think that this magnitude of crisis. Because Sri Lankan society we had all good social indicators, development indicators, and our literacy rate was high. The unemployment rate was down.
Right.
And we had, before the crisis, we had fairly good economic growth.
And I think you did answer the question, sir, in the manner in which you engaged as media with circumstances that were leading to the crisis. I think we'll have time for one final question from the gentleman sitting right in front, if we can. Okay, I'll come to you also, ma'am, quickly.
Thank you.
Hello, namaste everyone. I am from
if
Nepal.
I can just have this question, then I'll take your question, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to raise an issue in the perspective of public broadcasters' point of view. So far my understanding, we are living in the age of transformation or changing the world in terms of technology transformation and media transformation, as well as the transformation of the taste of the audience. So in this age, the social media is developing faster than the mainstream media. So we are in the race, mainstream media and the social media. Who is in the ahead and who is behind, that's a debatable issue. Thing is that when we just prepare in news on any sort of conflict issue from the conflict ground, if we get the news, then social media prepare another news. Then we have to verify the news. If social media, it is faster than the mainstream media, and the other public media, they collect from the news and the information from the social media, and they are faster than the mainstream public service media. So how could we overcome
the complexity
this
that you're indicating, sir? Point taken. Ma'am, if you can put your question, please, then we'll take both these final questions.
Yes. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm from Nepal. My concern is the representative of TV Afghanistan. I want to know what is the situation of women journalists in Afghanistan. I heard there are so many women journalists are left their job when the Taliban is coming in their state, and they are free for reporting in their work or not, and obviously it may be more difficult for women to work in the conflict zone, I think. And what is the situation now?
Right, hugely important question. If I can just get the first question to Oliver. So many versions of stories, even before we are able to file our stories officially, there are versions, news, fake news doing rounds in social media. Are we looking at some sort of an information conflict that the journalists have to jostle through?
Yeah, totally. I mean, like I already said, I've been to Afghanistan, Ukraine, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan in the last month, and it's always been a constant hassle, like which part of the story is true, right? I mean, of course, we do get our own findings. We have a camera crew on site. We have me. We talk to people. And then we also have these social media sources, which we need, of course, for TV stories, right? And then Afghanistan, I mean, I don't tell nothing new to any of you guys, but it's so difficult to really check, like, was that actually happening where they say it was happening? What was actually happening? So that was Afghanistan. Ukraine, the same. Like, there, of course, there's Russians infiltrating social media. There's the Ukrainian side. It's always so difficult, really. So we really try to stick what we are experiencing and what we can really objectively verify, but that's oftentimes very, very difficult. So this is a huge concern, and I think we are going to take some time to really solve that case.
Right. Dr. Surya Prakash, would you like to add to that point as well? There's so many versions, especially social media.
Yes, I will say that my experience tells me that mainstream media still remains an extremely responsible media. And social media quite often has become anti-social media. It's extremely dangerous, and I repeat this, in the context of societies which are very diverse. Social media can create havoc. Also in societies where there is conflict, it can create havoc. So actually Facebook some time ago had put out a whole list of do's and don'ts, especially for media managers in the newsroom. Look at the URL, look at the source. Sometimes, you know, they just alter this thing a little bit, and you don't catch it. You think it's the President of America's website or something like that. It's just skewed a little bit. So they had given a lot of pointers on how you need to detect that. We are living in a world now where social media is a reality. It also poses a very grave threat to social harmony. Let us not miss that point. Right. So it is for mainstream media to filter that, and all of us in mainstream media are acquiring that talent and,
so
the tools to
Yes.
deal with that,
A
as
lot of
my
responsibilities,
fellow panelist
sir.
was saying,
Yes, yes.
and that is very important.
Yes, a lot of responsibilities, sir.
May I add
Yes,
a
please.
little-
Yeah, if you can make a brief point, sir.
Yeah, whatever social media reported, at the end of the day, people come to mainstream media to verify them and get the truth. So as the, we realized that during the Sri Lankan situation.
Sir.
So one example, protesters, they were highly social media activated people. They did everything through social media. But at the end of the day, all the people, and they also came to the mainstream media to get their view and disseminate their view to the general public, and general public also with the mainstream media.
Right, right, absolutely. And I think it also indicates somewhere responsibility of the audiences as to where do you really source your information and news from. The very important question about what does it mean to be a woman journalist in the conflict zone. Katherine, if I can get that question to you, how does the challenge become different altogether?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer because there are so many of us that do work in conflict zones. I think Imogen will, agree with me on that. I think it's a certain type of person that can do the work, that can go into such areas and live in areas, and I think that's across the board. That's male and woman. Obviously, for women, depending on the places, where you are in the world.
And I think the question also came because we're talking about Afghanistan, where the challenges for women are altogether different.
In women, in Afghanistan at the moment, things it is a challenge. We're all finding our feet in this situation. And and hopefully women will be able to return to school. They will be able to study, to get an education and go back to work. There are some women that are still working. There are also women who are winning tenders from the new authorities. But hopefully within time, it will, all of this will improve. And the women will, their voices will be heard in this.
Right. Imogen, your final thoughts really. Many youngsters, young girls, young women who want to be part of journalists, who are going to cover stories from conflict zones. What is in store for women in particular?
Across the world.
Across the spectrum of reporting from conflict zones in particular.
Zones. Yeah. For women in particular, that's a difficult one to answer. I mean, look, I think the challenges are the same for men and women in the sense of processing what you're dealing with, what you're seeing, what you're witnessing. There's no difference there. Again, we go back to the topic of access, and I think perhaps that is different. I think there are some countries and societies where it is easier for a man to get access or to perhaps be taken more seriously. I do think that's changing a lot. I think I should say with Afghanistan, there's a privilege at the moment, I touched on that at the beginning, with foreign women getting access, which local Afghan female journalists are not getting. And we have made it a point in our reporting to say that, and to say this would not happen. This is there is a huge unfairness there, and we have a huge responsibility to tell that. On the other side, I'd say what's in store, it's a huge privilege to go in and tell stories, but also stories that, I can't speak across the board for women, but that women would affect them, that they would want to hear, that might not be as obvious. But I always kind of be careful about saying that, because I know a lot of men who would also feel quite passionately about those same stories. But girls' education, for example, is one we just absolutely need to keep up the news agenda and not forget how massive that issue is. And I do think, as women, I work very closely with Yogatim Lamai, our South Asia correspondent, and we will go in as a team, and that certainly is one area that we've very, very important for us to keep
right
covering.
there. But that's all the time, I'm afraid, we had in this panel conversation. Let me thank Dr. A. Surya Prakash, Mr. Prasad, Kaushalya, Ms. Imogen Anderson, Ms. Katherine, Whitehead, and Ms. Oliver Mayer. Thank you very much for joining us in this panel conversation. Thank you very much for those questions that came in. Shall we put our hands together for our panel of guests?